Hello and welcome back to Happy Birthday ADA. We are here for week 2, talking a little bit more about what is the Americans with Disabilities Act and what was the ADAA, the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendment that was added later on. We're here again with Dr. Natalie Burick, who is the Director of Disability Services over at Slippery Rock University. If you didn't catch her last week, just to introduce her a little bit, she does have her bachelor's degree in community programming for Americans with Disabilities from Slippery Rock University. She also has her master's degree from SRU in K-12 school counseling and a doctorate in education from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. She's been working at SRU for close to 10 years now in this disability sphere. So we are so happy and so thankful to have you here for our second week. Dr. Burick, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. Can you tell us a little bit more on really getting into what was the American Disabilities Act, and then what is this amendment that they added on later?
Sure. So Americans with Disabilities Act, again, was enacted in 1990 by President George H.W. Bush, and it's a civil rights law that protects Americans with disabilities and mostly like public sectors of life, education, transportation, employment. It protects those individuals from discrimination. And so they added the Amendments Act in 2008, 2009, just to ensure, because I think there was many aspects of the law that were too broad. And so when you read any history on the Amendments Act, it basically states that the law was too broad, and there were so many court cases being decided upon for discrimination cases against people with disabilities. And the courts were having a hard time determining what parts of the law they were working with. And so they added the Amendments Act to encompass more people with disabilities and different types of disabilities. Some of the common examples they give are people with epilepsy or people with cancer, and people just with various forms of any types of illnesses that could limit one or more major life activities, which is the definition of disability. So it just encompasses more, and it's a lot more broad.
Absolutely. So when I think about epilepsy or the other example that you showed, those a lot of times are those invisible disabilities, the ones that we don't necessarily know just by looking at someone as they're walking down the street. Did the ADA still cover invisible disabilities, or did that really get honed in with the ADAA?
I think it was more honed in with the ADAA. And when you think of, like I said, those are basic examples, but when you think of a person with cancer, some people may think, well, that just could be temporary. But obviously, it's going to limit one or more major life activities. And for some people, it's not temporary. And it changes many aspects of that person's life. And so and then we talk about barriers that may happen for them in their daily life or their daily work environment or treatments they may need to go to. And so that's why the Amendments Act protects, and it's more broad to protect those individuals.
Absolutely. That's always good to know. I have shared the example with some of our employees in trainings in the past. My life before the city, I had just started a job and shattered my leg and was eligible to keep my job under the ADA, but had no idea why. So up until you just explained that, that's what kept me going when I had that short-term disability.
Sure. We have students here who will have, we call them temporary disabilities. They may have a concussion or in a car accident or something that just happens in their life that creates a barrier in the academic setting. They may not be able to drive themselves to campus, or they may not be able to get to class. And so we put accommodations in place based off the student's documentation and based off of their self-report. We determine what the barriers are going to look like in the classroom, and then we decide what they need to continue their education. And so, yes, we do encompass temporary disabilities into our work.
Absolutely. It's so important and so helpful for people. And what expansions do you think that brought for people with disabilities? Was it really more focused on just sort of telling employers what they had to do, or do you think that it helped expand into who saw themselves as someone with a disability, perhaps?
I think both. I think too that it just created more protections from discrimination as well. So if somebody is telling you that something happened to them that was devastating and this created a disability for them, those protections were in place at that point, and it wasn't the employer determining what was appropriate, it's the law determining it, and it's a federal guideline, and those are things that we need to follow in the public sectors of, I mean, in all aspects of life, but this is what this law protects, mostly. So yeah, I think just adding that extra layer of protection for those individuals so they're not discriminated against in their employment or schooling, etc.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sure.
And are there any surprising changes or revelations that have come out of these two acts, or anything that we can point to that really shows the difference that these have made?
I think for a lot of people with disabilities, when you talk to them about the specific moment or these laws, they may, just people that I've talked to in my work life and just the class that I've taught here and just the students that I work with, they'll tell you that their lives have changed drastically and they're able to do so much more, and they're not looked at, you know, in the past. And history will, if you look back on history, it will show you that history will show you that people with disabilities back in the 1800s, for example, were treated so poorly and put into institutions because no one thought that people with disabilities were important, or that they could do the jobs that someone without a disability can do, which is so far from the truth. And so I think it's important to realize this law was put into place for that reason, and it's just broadened what individuals with disabilities can do and how they can work and how they are definitely important people in society. um, and so again, I think that's why it's so important for people to understand the ADA and how wonderful it has made life for some people with disabilities.
Absolutely. You've mentioned that you actually literally teach the class on this, right? You have a class on Americans with Disabilities. Tell me a little bit about that. What made you want to teach it? How did you come up with the curriculum? What important highlights do you have?
Sure. So I taught this past semester in the spring as an adjunct, so I was just a temporary faculty here at SRU, and there may be an opportunity for me to teach again in coming semesters, which I hope there is, because I absolutely enjoyed it. I loved it so much. But what I did was I created the curriculum based off the law, and so I just had different aspects of the class that I taught. So it was a night class, so we met once a week for 2.5 hours. So week one, we talked about Americans with disabilities in general, and then week two was we talked about the ADA and the law and how it was enacted and who enacted it. And then each class after that, we talked about a different type of disability. Um, and so we read a lot of case law. We watched a lot of videos. We watched people that were interviewed with disabilities, and just YouTube videos of people being interviewed with disabilities and what that looked like for them, being a person with a disability in their workforce and in school, and how their life was different because of a disability, and also just how the ADA has helped those individuals. And so it was a great class, and it was something that I love to teach because it's just a general part of your life. And so whether you're a special education major here at SRU or not, it was a class that just anybody could take. I had a lot of education majors in my class, but I also had a lot of students who were safety majors, or they were majoring in the sciences or exercise science or health programs. And so it wasn't a requirement for them, but they decided to take it anyways. And I had a lot of really great feedback from the students on how they just were like, wow, I had no idea. We did some simulation exercises, and I know simulation exercises always are not the best to showcase what somebody with a disability is experiencing, because it's never going to show that accurately, but it just kind of gave insight into what something may look like and how it may be different for a person with a disability. And the students loved the simulation activities that we did. Um, so um, Overall, there was so much involved in that class, in the curriculum. There was so much content, and so it was, for me, a wonderful opportunity to reach a different, broader population of students. And the one student said to me, like, whoa, there was so much that I just didn't know. And I'm a special education major, and they were a newer student in their first few years here, so they have so many more classes to take that will just shape their experience for sure. But that made me feel good. So I always say I love to educate, and this is my opportunity to teach people what I know. And like I've said in the first interview, there's so much more that I need to learn. Um, but I love to read and learn and just try to do better every day.
Absolutely. I love that you talked about the simulations too. We know that you can never live in someone else's experience. You'll never know exactly what they go through day to day, just because they're not you. It's not your life.
Right.
But this can be such a powerful way to really give a little bit of insight on what something might look like. What are some things that you might never have noticed? I know I've done one for people with mental health issues, specifically schizophrenia, and just putting on headphones to hear what you might hear if you have auditory hallucinations changed my life. I'll never know what it's actually like, but even just thinking about having those headphones on for half an hour makes such a difference and an impact on just the empathy that you have for someone else, or being able to understand or thinking differently about what you can do to help or to move them forward. Little things like that really go a long way.
Sure, absolutely. I think the most powerful things that I did in the class, because it was a 2.5 hour night class, there was a room for a lot of different types of activities. So like I mentioned before, we watched interviews with different people, different types of disabilities, and we watched a lot of interviews with people discussing mental health concerns. And so I think that was really powerful for a lot of students. Um, and it was just like I said, another great opportunity for them to learn. And then we would discuss afterwards, and students would ask questions. Some students were just quiet and just processing, but some would ask questions. And again, that was just powerful opportunity for us to just talk about the ADA.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a great class.
Yeah, it was so good. I hope that I get the opportunity to teach it again in the future.
Absolutely. And then thinking about the ADA and the ADAA, are there any real challenges that you know of or can think of that would have been faced as these were being implemented, or that employers or employees might be facing now?
I think again, it goes back to being educated and to understanding what all um, what goes into the ADA. I think the education piece is probably the most powerful example I can give. Also, just like I did mention in my first interview that a lot of people, if you don't know, you just need to ask. If you're trying to help an individual in your workplace with a disability, you need to ask them what their barriers are and how you can help them overcome the barrier and what reasonable accommodations would work for that person. And I know there are specific people that do that in the workplace. For example, it's probably human resources. But if you're just a colleague, if you're a colleague, not just, but if you're a colleague of someone with a disability, again, just ask, do you need help accessing this building? Can I help you do this? And most people with disabilities will say, no, I think I'm good. But some may want the help. And so I think it's just important to ask. Um, but overall, again, just being a good self advocate, trying to use person first language, all of those things I think are really important.
Absolutely. That's great advice as well. I know human resources and civil service is typically where you would go to, and where we encourage our employees to come to first in order to gain access to things, to make those requests for reasonable accommodations. And in week 3, we'll talk about that in more detail. We've also had a few lunch and learns with employees with disabilities, or about them, to talk about those things of using the people first language, of not assuming that someone needs help. Not everyone wants you to jump in and open the door.
Right.
That could actually be painful for someone, or just
Yep.
offensive to someone. So always keeping that in mind of having those conversations. It's really great to hear that reflected in something that you're giving me lots of ideas on what we can do when we finally get back into the workplace, on moving those lunch and learns forward as well. Again, I'm the trainer, so I'm constantly thinking about how do we educate, how do we educate, how do we educate. So these are some really, really great tidbits.
There's
Absolutely.
this really great video on YouTube, and it's just a few minutes long, but it's a good training video. And it talks about how to ask a person with a disability if they need assistance. And the first clip of the video is a person who uses a wheelchair in an elevator in a workplace going up to their office. And another person in the elevator, also a colleague, gets down like on their knees and like screams in the person's face, who's the wheelchair user. And the person in the wheelchair who uses the wheelchair is like, you don't need to scream in my face. I can hear you. You can stand up beside me and have a conversation with me. I'm human too. So it's a great video, just to start a training off with, and I use that in my class, and the students really liked that. But it just gives like a good, it just gives, I mean, I haven't seen or noticed too many people doing drastic things like that, but it just does give good examples on how just to ask people if they need assistance rather than just trying to, again, overcompensate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm definitely going to look that up, and it sounds
Yeah.
like something we're going to be using as the centerpiece of election in the near future.
Yeah.
It always cracks me up too. Language access is like that as well, where if someone has limited English, the natural reaction is to get louder instead
Right.
of anything else. So always a
Yeah.
good reminder to do that. All right, fantastic. And are there any important takeaways that you think our employees should have from our conversation about the ADA or the ADAA?
Just learn, read. I think that's the most important. Educate yourself, educate others. Those are the most important things I think I can share. Again, a lot of people will call on me to ask for assistance when they're trying to work through um, certain things with students here at the university. And I love when colleagues call me and ask for my advice or opinions because it shows me that they really care about the work that they're doing with their students. And again, just be an advocate and teach others how to be a good self-advocate as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Sure.
That's all the formal questions I have for you. Is there anything else that we should know?
No, thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. It's been definitely great to talk with you about these things. And happy birthday, ADA.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being with us 2 weeks in a row. This has been so informative. So thank you again to Dr. Burick, and happy birthday, ADA.
Take care. Thank you.